Right now I'm letting everybody in,
Okay.
and because of the problems that I usually have running like this with this miserable internet, um, hopefully I don't have to restart it sometimes, but sometimes I do. Anyway, you got a copy of the slides and you're more than welcome to use them whenever you feel like it. Modify them or do whatever. I can send you the originals. It just takes a bit of download ability. I could put it in Dropbox and send it to you in PowerPoint. So while we're waiting, I got 2 more minutes waiting for people to come in. 14 people are in.
Okay.
You might give an overview of what happened in the Bahamas.
What do you mean? What happened in the Bahamas?
Your Bahama gathering that you went to?
Okay,
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. So when we go to the Starlink part, maybe you might want to share that because I think that's really special.
Okay, I can do that at that point.
Oops, well, that's what I said I didn't want to do. So let me do this. And whoever's come in, I see we have quite a few people joining in. I apologize for that. My connections aren't the world's best. This is Joan Conover, and I have Jason Spitz as a guest here. We also will have Frank Smith joining us once he gets out of the helicopter that I think he's in. He's doing some search and recovery work up in the Chesapeake. We're a very active board in this organization. So anyway, today we're covering offshore communications, offshore devices, applications, and usage. We're going to cover a little on satellite phone, locators, Starlink, and something on charts, but mainly on the download features for charts. You have to think differently when you're on devices that aren't connected to the internet, and internet isn't everywhere yet. This is Seven Seas Cruising Association, and we're very proud to invite you all to join us. You can use the SSCA YouTube channel for public views. It's either for members only on ssca.org, but most of our videos are posted as a public service on the Seven Seas Cruising Association on YouTube. And so you'll find it playlist developed for best practices. And then you'll also be able to find the Easier and Safer Cruising Summit that is created by Luke and Jackie Lee. And then the SSCA Circumnavigation Summit, which is an hour-long discussion with circumnavigators who've gone around the world and the things they've seen and done. And there are actually 25 of them who've done these presentations. It's a pretty nice group of folks. Now on to communications. Topics: offshore and apps. We're going to talk suggestions on best practices. We'll talk satellite. We're usually talking Iridium in this case. Email and connectivity, and we will touch on Starlink. I'll talk a little on weather applications, such as predict wind or weather services. Most of those come by email. And then I'm going to talk satellite locators, SMS text messages, GPS. We'll cover a little on charts, chart plotting. And if we have time, I really want to go over a little bit on the critical devices, search and rescue, your EPIRB, personal locator beacons, AIS, your automatic information system, and then radio line of sight, the VHF digital select calling, which is used so much down in the islands. And also how to get some of your information and stuff that you want. I see we have 23 people now signed in. I would like to invite anyone to chat or hit Q&A. We'll have areas to stop as we go through to ask questions. And you're more than welcome to chat and ask your questions as we go through this. And after the presentation, the recording will be put up on YouTube, and the recording will be put on the SSCA website, and the slides will be put on the website, and you will be able to link to them or use them as PDFs. I'm hoping everyone is able to hear and see the screen. If you can't, someone hit the chat button and tell me you can't hear or see. I'll wait for a minute. We have 25 people. So no sign, so it sounds like everybody can hear us. So next slide. Okay, getting critical information when you're away from the internet. The way we on small boats, we get weather data in various ways. We use nearshore cell or offshore. We have various devices, Iridium, some single sideband. But remember, these are slow. They're very, very slow. If you get 9600 baud, you're screaming. Size matters, being organized matters when you're downloading data along small pipes. There is no real internet offshore unless you have Starlink, and we'll talk about that. Mostly you're looking at text, SMS, or email. You may have VHF radio, which is line of sight. You may have NOAA voice. And when I'm offshore, I download usually, my weather is all organized and I push a button and I download it and I spend an hour in the morning downloading once a day. Sometimes I can't do it. Some vessels use Cirrus radio weather, but it's not really an offshore footprint. Now, Jason, you mentioned the cell service near shore and the iPhone 14, or at least the iPhone 14. Can you expand on that a little?
Yeah, it's satellite service. It's a new offering by Apple that's included on the iPhone 14. I don't have an iPhone 14 yet. I have a 13, unfortunately, so I can't speak to how it works. It is a emergency safety only with texting. And the other thing that I'm not sure of is how that works offshore. My understanding, it is satellite and I believe through Iridium, but I'm not sure. And I don't know how it works offshore versus like in a canyon where people may be climbing or canyoning on land. So I think that is something that we all should be watching to see what Apple does in the upcoming, versions of the iPhone, because that may become another just, backup safety device.
Yeah, I heard a rumor that maybe they were making deals with Starlink, but nothing's been done, so nobody knows. On the left side of the screen, you will see two images. One is talking about how you put a cell antenna on your boat. We will go over that. And also how you put a Wi-Fi antenna or a high gain antenna together on your boat. That's the lower picture. There are some real important things to be aware of that. And you may not pick up the details in this briefing as much, but you will get the slides and it will give you an idea of what has to be done. Now let's talk about email. The main communications offshore is email. So we're going to have a discussion on email and your boat. Remember, we probably do not have internet, so you're going to come up with a plan. Now, Iridium hardware, the devices, they're usually iOS or Android. It might be laptop if you're, depending on how you've got your stuff set up, but Iridium usually uses an Android or an Apple to access. Each vendor has specific email systems. They're unique. They filter for offshore email. You'll probably get your own email address offshore. Iridium is usually, I would say most boats are using Iridium at this point in time. Some are using handheld, and we'll cover that in a little bit. There is no internet or broadband on Iridium. You will have text, you will have voice, you'll have email, but you're not going to have the internet as we expected. And the download speeds can be very slow, and it's very dependent on your boat motion and your access to the satellite in the sky that you're reaching for. And I'm going to turn this over now again to Jason, who's mentioned Garmin InReach Explorer, Iridium, Zoleo, and the ACR Bivy stick, although neither of us have that one. I'm familiar with the InReach, the Iridium Go, and Zoleo, but Jason actually wrote a wonderful article about Zoleo, and I'm going to let you talk that over a little bit to compare the difference between the Iridium and some of these other devices.
Sure. So they all use the Iridium network, everything we're talking about here. So it's really the interfaces and, what features do they offer. For Monica and I, we've been cruising the US East Coast and the Bahamas for the last 3 years. And as we look to, most of our sailing has been what I'll term near shore, because really the only times we've been out of touch and rely solely on the Iridium network and satellite is on our crossings. And I would say up till this year in the Exuma Land and Sea Park. Now there are some towers that have been put up by Alive. I'll call them near the Exuma Park, so it's possible to get some cell. But comparing the three units, and the reason we went with Zoleo were a couple, and the major reason was cost. The cost of entry is the least expensive of the three, where Zoleo is $199, and you'll oftentimes find a $50 rebate on that. And their cost structure for limited is what we use most of the time is $20 a month. There's a 250 message plan for $35 a month, and unlimited is $50 a month. So when you look at those compared to the InReach Explorer and certainly the Go, which is $160 a month for unlimited, there are some significant cost differences. I would say the Zoleo for the casual user doing short hops without extended need for satellite, it's going to probably work well for you. There are some things we liked, such as when I'm trying to get weather for the few days we may be offshore, I just have one of my contacts text us, and the app for the Zoleo, if both parties have it, and it's free to download the app. So for instance, we'll have my son send us the weather forecast, and it can be not, rather than 160 characters of most of the devices, you can actually have, not, they call it 950 plus, it's actually 1,048 characters, including the phone number or email that they send it from. So, you know, it allows a reasonable text message to be sent in one message rather than broken up into many parts. There is no voice on either the Zoleo or the new Bivy stick, which is very similar, or the Garmin. The difference with the Iridium Go, and there's a new Iridium Go unit that is 40 times faster than the previous. We have not used it, but I think that's a real option. That does have voice built in. It's actually built into the actual unit now, so it acts like a cell phone. You don't need a separate cell phone, so that's something to think about. I think from a cost standpoint, from a safety unit, the Iridium Go would really meet the needs of somebody who's, for instance, doing the whole Caribbean or traveling across to Europe or around the world, as it does have good overall coverage and gives you that critical voice link that's there. The new unit is more expensive with the tracking unit and antenna and kind of the communication kit. It's $2,000. So you're talking a significant difference in cost. But when I look and say, okay, if we were going to head offshore for longer periods of time, what would I likely do? I think the Zoleo is great for what we're doing, but I don't know that it would meet all of our needs for more extended cruising offshore.
Jason, thank you for that. Normally what we do is we use the Zoleo or I would use an InReach, but I have a Zoleo. I would use that as a backup to my other equipment. I would want a Zoleo in my ditch bag, or be sure to take that with you. I have added Michael Whalen to the discussion. He doesn't probably know it, but Michael, we're looking at you. And he asked a question or made a comment that Apple's emergency SOS is via Globalstar and technically only supported in US, Canada, France, Ireland, and UK. And then he mentioned the chat's disabled. I have to apologize. There were some changes in Google over the weekend, and I'm still pulling the accounts together. So I'm not sure why chat doesn't work, but I do know I'm not live streaming, so something's been turned off somewhere. But Michael, you're more than welcome to join if you have some thoughts about Apple's emergency SOS. That would be interesting. Global Star has some footprint issues, so that's kind of interesting that they're doing the SOS via that device. Do you have any comments, Michael?
Nothing more to add. The Apple's made apparently an investment in Global Star, so it'll be interesting to see if the coverage map changes, or if they'll find another provider, such as it's been rumored with Starlink. But that is their emergency beacon provider right now.
Thank you very much, and you're welcome to stay on and add as we go through the presentation.
Will do.
Iridium Go, they've got some new price packaging, predict wind, oceans. Everyone will sell you a device, but what you have to look at is what the cost is per month. And if you can park it, I mean, parking off season makes a lot of sense. You don't waste minutes that way. A lot of different vendors have different fee minutes or plans, or you can buy, they'll give you a special deal to buy the devices, but then you're locked into whatever. And I'm keeping an eye out for what is happening with Starlink, but I still know that we have to have Iridium, or I use a single sideband a lot. There's Inmarsat, I think probably that's not competitive for what we do, but they have a nice emergency, one of their devices, one of their phones and stuff is really, really nice for SOS issues. But always compare your satellite footprint for wherever you're going with whatever device you have. For example, Apple has Global Star, where you'd better find your footprint and see if you get coverage there. It's kind of like cell phone coverages. Satellite has the same issues. Packages are changing daily. Check at the boat shows. We will be at the Annapolis Boat Show, and you can check in with us at our booth for SSCA, but things are changing. Now, we will cover a little bit on Starlink. Starlink's operational, but the rules are not set for offshore vessels yet. Now I've got another question here. XM satellite marine weather. John Parsons asked, and XM satellite marine weather, and we'll answer that live. I haven't used that, John. I do know that it's there's a lot of satellite weather information that comes in. The one thing that you have to know is if you're going to be getting satellite weather like that, you need to practice with it ahead of time, like any weather or any app, so you know how it's going to work for you. And I would check the footprint. But if you know your weather and you can get your XM broadcast for weather, but again, look at your footprint. Again, there's no internet for Iridium or SSB offshore email. If someone says they can get to the internet with either of those devices, we probably can offer them a Brooklyn Bridge for sale. Now, just a reminder on email usage, it will be slow transmission, even if you have something that's 40 times faster. Email software is usually loaded on your device, and emails are downloaded during a session. Never advertise your offshore email address, because you do not want spam. Protect that address. It's a special one. I'm going to click, well, it did on its own, so I'm going to go to Starlink, geofencing and usage. Starlink has their new RV. It's now called Roam, and the boats have been using it. But there's also a threat for geofencing, which means that they will block the use of the antenna in certain areas or geographic references. That is of concern, because everybody's able to get it now and are using it. And for example, Starlink is now at Black Point in the Bahamas. The SSCA lead boat was It's Time with Joni Thomas and Norbert Johansson, but Jason was there and took pictures. And how is she using her Starlink there, Jason?
Well, we left as it was being installed, but we've already heard reports and seen some Facebook posts from Lorraine that cruisers are able to use it, local residents are able to use it. So I do know it's up and running. It's been interesting to see daily Lorraine liking photos, Facebook, and doing other things. So I think it's really changed their, ability, because a live, the MiFi units that so many people have here, or even the home, are really, they tend to end up being slow during working or awake hours because of the number of locals who end up trying to stream and cruisers trying to stream. So the systems in busy areas oftentimes become much more unstable. Now, I'm on the Alive MiFi right now, and we've been very stable in our location, but we're about 3 miles north of Norman's Key and about 4.5 miles south of Highborn. We're between two towers and we're away from the boat. So we're getting really good reception and not really having slowdowns here. I can tell you in Black Point, that was not our experience when there were 60 plus boats there for the SSCA weekend. So the excitement around Starlink there was great, and Lorraine was thrilled to receive it. And I think we're doing something that's changing the safety of the island during storms and other things. But I'll add that we have seen dozens and dozens of boats with Starlink. Almost all are using the smaller antenna that was made for RVs on the tripod, so the one with the motor in it. We've run into some people who have actually disabled the motor, and they've reported almost no dropouts, like 1 or 2 per month with a second or two, by just having the antenna pointed straight up like the flat model. My understanding is that the new pricing structure and the new structure that was just put out on roaming versus non-roaming and global use versus regional use, that the new flat model is not enabled for mobile use. So it seems like the less expensive model, the 699 antenna, that's smaller and uses less power, by the way, is probably the choice for boats right now. And disabling the motor may, we've heard it from several people, definitely increases the reliability quite a bit. But overall, everybody has been thrilled in the Bahamas. They say their speeds are faster than what they had at home. They've experienced no significant blackouts or problems, including on their crossings from the US to here.
Well, that's interesting to hear, Jason. Starlink is not authorized to be used offshore by boats. It's supposed to be
right,
like shore or in an RV. But we SSCA had an event, the Bahamas Gathering, just about a week and a half ago at Black Point, and got a Starlink antenna over there, a package set up for Lorraine so that the community there can have good information as we go into hurricane season, because the big scare is that cell doesn't work when the weather gets bad, and at least the Starlink, as long as they have power, they will be able to at least see what's happening before a storm gets there. And that wasn't the case. Now I've got another question. Oh, Frank Smith. Okay, well, Frank's going to join us. That's great. Let him come in. And Frank is our vice president. And I'm going to allow him to talk. There you are, Frank, you're up. We had some rescues with Starlink, and I will cover that. Boats on passage are using Starlink. SSCA boat from Norfolk to Antigua said that they had coverage the whole way. They were out for about an hour or so, but they were a big cat and they were flopping around in the water, so it was pretty choppy. Coastal USA and Pacific are using Starlink. And Frank came in just at the right time. I'm going to turn over to him about the Starlink rescues and boat watch. One thing that it did point out is that people are using non-government channels to report stuff. Like they're using Facebook to tell where rescue lat longs and things, and it needs to be organized. It isn't there yet. And Frank, do you want to talk about the rescues and what you know about them?
Well, just several of them have been enabled and facilitated by Starlink here recently. And so I'm hoping that will get the word to folks that are making the geofencing policies. Although the big bad news about the use of Starlink is they use their regular suite of internet apps. So, I mean, running a rescue through the Rescue Coordination Center on Instagram isn't likely to happen. Facebook was enabled for lawns and communications, and finally somebody got around to telling the Coast Guard what was going on. Seems that their EPIRB didn't work, but their Starlink did. So it's kind of an interesting reversal of roles. And so that's happened in now 3 different situations. We had a disabled vessel, we had a vessel sinking, and we had a medical emergency. All 3 have been assisted, not necessarily directed by Starlink, but were assisted by having that Starlink on board. So it worked out fairly well. The connections were well offshore. And so, you know, as they keep saying, they're not intended for the RV edition to be out in the middle of the ocean, but guess what? They work. So I think we'll start to see more and more of this coming as well. Joan?
Well, I'll make one more comment on Starlink. As I was, heard in the background during this event where a boat hit a whale and sank off of Panama. They were about 12 miles off. The ARC boats all had Starlink, and they ended up helping coordinate between themselves to pick the 4 people up out of the life raft. They did have an Iridium cell phone or a satellite phone, but they didn't have good batteries. So they could only talk to it a little bit. The EPIRB did work. It did send a message to Peru. Peru got the message and then sent it to California. But there wasn't information about the EPIRB, I believe the MMSI number, or there was something wrong with it. So there was a lot of discussion on Facebook trying to get the MMSI number, and that's, or the lat long of the device of the vessel sinking, and that's not where it's supposed to be. But Frank will, yeah, it needs to be worked out differently if we're going to be using Starlink. Now let's talk about weather apps. There's a learning curve for those apps. All of the apps that you use on board to pull down information, and weather is one of the most important ones. You have to understand your boat, your route, and there's a learning curve. Now, communications offshore exists one way or another. You have Iridium or email, or maybe single sideband, or satellite locators with GPS or SMS text. The only device that I have, app that I've worked with, PredictWind, uses the SMS text to send messages and grid files, very compressed, to via either inReach or through your Iridium connection, your Iridium Go. And that is a very nice application to use. You have to know what you're looking at, though. You have to know your weather. They have a lot of different features. They've got a new data hub. And they also allow a chat and a tracking map, so you can watch and follow the events as they unfold. You'll see on the left side, you'll see an image from PredictWind. And I picked this one specifically because this was a rally coming back. And you'll see at the bottom where there's a blue thing that goes back and forth. That's a route marker. And all of a sudden it's taking off and going straight west. It turns out it was going straight west in that weather and those seas at 25 knots all at once. So I'm watching, trying to figure out, and they had a problem. The Coast Guard came out, put them under tow, but 25 knots of speed in 25-foot seas, it kind of destroyed the boat. They got everybody out, everybody was okay, but the boat was not. But that was, we watched all of that via the PredictWind, both on our devices, and some people had the internet. Down the further down is the ARC Europe uses something called Yellow Brick. I think that's going to be phasing out as more and more people get other devices, like the ARC boats all had the Iridium or the Starlink, but you honestly need to have an Iridium Go or something, because Starlink may not be here for a time, or they may geofence it, we don't know, and you don't want to be out in the middle of the water when that happens.
Well, it's not very portable either.
No.
So you can't very well rely on it as a lifeboat strategy.
No. Well, and you can't do Iridium Go. That's why you need those satellite handhelds, the GPS locators and whatnot. Vendors also provide enhancements, and there's government-free data you can download. You just need to know what you want, and you need to be efficient with it. NOAA weather reports, you can get text, FTP mail requests, you can download the images. They are big, so you have to be careful what you ask for. Same with grid files. I don't know how many times someone has got a hold of us going, our email isn't working because there's too much junk in the buffer and we don't know how to delete it. And you ask what they did and they said, well, we subscribe to this and we subscribe to that. Offshore don't do it. You just need little pieces of things that you need. You're not going to be going 1,000 miles a day. So just take a snapshot of the area you're at. Email services, there's vendors for that. Weather services, there's vendors for that. Tracking services, like I said, Predict Wind with their weather, they have a very good weather system. Their model is model based. They offer routing information. They have a data hub. I like that little device. It works on my Android. Oceans has a wonderful email package. They have compressed the data. So they offer the services to buy the Iridium Go and to get email via Iridium Go. SailMail is used with single sideband. A lot of people use it. I use AirMail, the app that he uses, to actually pop my email when I'm using the internet, or I pop email through my radio. But that is, I am a ham operator, so I can do it that way. Or if I bought SailMail services, I could do it as just a regular radio operator. Satellite locators and trackers, InReach and Zoleo. All of those devices, they're 160 characters, but they do have they're a good backup. You can carry them with you. They're got controlled, the batteries are included. Be sure whatever you have has internal batteries, and you have a way to either use solar or something to charge them if you get in your ditch bag. That's a whole different story, but at least have a way to power up your devices if you're going to be using it when you're leaving the boat.
Joan, if I could just
Yes.
add that these satellite trackers almost all offer some sort of weather as part of their app. Those are not good offshore strategies. The weather is to a specific land-based location typically. So don't expect that. But the InReach, the Zoleo, etc., either through Predict Wind or Oceans. And we've used the Oceans actually has a package for the Zoleo, and we tried that for several months, and it does provide you the data for the area that you're either in by a press of a button, or you can put a lat long in and it will give you the weather for that location for a 48-hour period. And they do that in a pretty compressed fashion, although it will take several messages to get that through because Zoleo hasn't signed a deal with them for app to app. So it is limited to the 160 characters rather than the 950.
Yeah, and I know that some weather routers, for example, Chris Parker will make his weather forecast for 160 characters if you tell him what your device is. And that's a really nice thing to have a person in the loop and get exact weather for yourself. And that's
Right.
Marine Weather Center. He will email you weather, and if you need it, he's a person in the loop. Just realize that all of these devices you're using, most of them will work on the internet. They have, it works on the internet with their apps, most of them. I think they're all looking forward to when Starlink starts working. And if it works from your home base internet, it will work with Starlink when it happens. It's just, you got to be organized when you're thinking, because there's so many options. You pick one and you learn it. Now let's talk about sat trackers, locators, a little bit about that. Backup your internet tracking displays and maybe SOS a little bit, because I think that's pretty important. Satellite locators include Garmin. We've talked about Garmin, Zoleo, and Iridium. Just when you're doing this, ahead of time, you set on the website, you update your settings, your email addresses, and you test and use it before you leave your shore. I can't tell you how many times we've gotten calls from someone who bought all the stuff at the boat show, headed offshore, and they don't know how to use it. And they don't even know how to dial in. So they're all of a sudden talking to you on a cell phone, hoping they don't lose your contact so that you can tell them how to use their Zoleo or use their InReach to send messages. So do it ahead of time. And if you send someone a location message on a schedule, do it, or people will be jumping through hoops. Have a float plan with someone, tell them what you're doing. If you're going to check in with them, check in with them. If you don't, at least tell them you may be going to bad weather, you're not going to check in, don't panic yet. Because I think Frank can speak to that about BOLO or requests for information on boats that haven't checked in on time, and they're perfectly fine. Now, many of the devices work worldwide, but again, check the footprint. Now, one thing I'd like to touch on, the SOS feature that all of these devices have. It is a separate feature and a separate sign up, and there's a fee for it usually. Sometimes it comes free, but you have to see what your package is. All those commercial services do utilize government satellites or systems or report SOS messages and whatnot to government facilities. The commercial services who have an SOS feature will report to government entities, but you have to figure out how they do it and what the rules are. Read the print. Starlink does not right now have a procedure to support government communications. And we saw that in all the rescues, I think, Frank, that was confusing because some things were going to Facebook and some people were calling on cell phones, and it wasn't the usual interaction that you saw with the government, someone, handling the rescue in one spot. It was kind of everywhere. I think some procedures need to be put in place.
Well, I mean, it just needs to remind folks that some of those are simply connections. They're not applications or functions.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for example, Starlink will give you the ability to connect to wherever you want, but you've got to know where you want to go.
Right.
And that's where some of the curveball comes in. You can't connect to a rescue coordination center just on your own. It just doesn't pop up on a web browser like that.
Yeah, it's a different way of thinking. Your EPIRB, we'll touch that maybe if we have time. I put some of the pictures of some of the devices. The Zoleo's over on the right, in the center is Iridium, and then you see Spot. Spot uses global star satellites. I would suggest that a Spot is better for onshore and not so much for offshore, because we've used it and we years ago used it. Still you have them, but they have big holes. So you come across and your tracking map wouldn't have you on it. And then your family get all upset. And then you're getting all these messages on your handheld something, or getting emails saying, where are you? We don't see you on the map. Garmin InReach, Iridium, Zoleo use Iridium satellites, and it's everywhere. You SOS button, there's always the devices, all of the Iridium, everybody has an SOS function. Find out what that does, because if you're going to push that button for SOS, you'd better know what the rules are. It may be supported by a commercial company called Geos, or maybe Global Rescue. They're commercial rescue services, but read the fine print, because if you call for SOS help and they take over to help contact the US or foreign entities or whatever, they're expecting you to do some certain things. And if you go off and do something on your own and they're supposed to go rescue you, you may end up with a very large bill. So the SOS button and whatnot, they have a search and rescue, but read the fine print, set up the procedure and practice. Think about what you would do if you had to push that SOS button and maybe your boat's sinking, or maybe, I don't know, whatever's happening. But Iridium Go has that functionality as well. All of them do. Final comments on the satellite locators. GPS tracking, you register with the vendor for services, usually yearly. You have to set up your tracking ahead of time, and you tell people where you're at, or you send them a link. Figure out how that works ahead of time. Don't do it when you're offshore. Your SOS features, again, device must be registered with a vendor, Global Rescue, Geos. Figure out how they're going to help you. But But all of those commercial services, when they get a call, an SOS call from you on your device, they will go ahead and go to the same government emergency contact as an EPIRB or a PLB. And that's in either foreign countries have those services, and that's what those SOS commercial vendors do. They know how to reach out to the government agencies that we don't know how to do. Now, for emergencies, you have some preset messages or you text or whatnot, vendor specific. Batteries, be sure you have good batteries and test your EPIRB before you leave, but figure out how to test it so you don't send out a real signal. But batteries in your EPIRB, you should be testing those every time you go offshore. Test your battery in your EPIRB and do it before you leave. So if you have to get a new battery, you can do it. And again, good view of sky. Most of these handhelds need a good view of sky for the different satellite services. Frank, did you want to add anything in there?
No, and just be careful and make sure you know how to use your respective systems. We just had a commercial false alarm today from a ship that was sending out its daily test message, but he forgot to say test. So basically it came out as a live mayday. It was quickly corrected, but it got everybody spun up for a little while. Make sure you know how to use your systems.
Now let's go maps and charts a little bit, because everybody likes their charts and their maps and paper electronic charts. And the reason I'm bringing this up, because you may want to try to download these, and they are big. So you want to do them at shore when you got good connections. And sometimes we're starting everything to be integrated. So your maps, charts, plotters, everything's becoming more and more integrated. And so I think we'll eventually see a true integration of these pieces. Nautical maps, there's a lot of free charts, print on demand. There are a lot of online services. Everything is moving to electronic nautical maps or charts. The older charts, the rasters. In fact, I think this month or next month is the end of that for NOAA's US maps. And map vendors are developing new formats. For example, Waterway Guide, the Bahamas Guide for 2022. He doesn't have 23 out yet, Jason, I don't think, does he? I don't think so. But they use the new formats for the Waterway Guide for the Bahamas. To see electronic maps, you need a chart plotter or you need a viewer. Online, you can actually get a free viewer from NOAA. But then there's also the Open CPM app that you can use. It has lots of features. It downloads a lot of maps. They're available, and you can use it with something called MBT tiles. If I have time, I'll go over those a little. But Aquamaps, it's also a good chart plotter, has maps for the world. The initial app is free or minimal charge. Upgrades, for the US is something like $14.95 a year, but it covers all of the shorelines of the US and includes all of the Corps of Engineers survey data. So you see the most recent stuff, and a lot of that stuff doesn't get loaded to the other maps that NOAA has for a long time. So it really works. SSCA has got a discount in place with Aquamaps, and we like watching them, especially for the ICW. Keith,
John,
yeah.
If I could just add, Aquamap for the Bahamas uses the Explorer charts, which most Bahamas cruisers consider the most accurate. We run Navionics on our Raymarine chart plotter, and I use Aquamap Explorer on the iPad right next to it. And 9 times out of 10, the Explorer charts on Aquamap. And frankly, I like Aquamap, their interface and everything that they have to offer over our chart plotter, other than it's not integrated into the autopilot at this point. Something that we may see though as time goes on. They're very responsive, and it's just a great overall app. So you can try it for free, and I recommend everybody download it and take a look at it. At least they're doing some pretty neat things.
Yeah, they're very responsive, and they have they've got a new deal with NOAA, and everybody is uploading data somewhere of your depth data, like they will upload it to Navionics, but Aquamaps is uploading it to NOAA. So that data from boats that they sends up to Aqua Maps actually will get into the actual maps from NOAA. So that's kind of interesting.
They also
They
have
also-
a very sweet deal with the Army Corps of Engineers. So if you're an
Yes,
Yes,
inshore sailor, you get all kinds of amazing information a lot faster than if you have to wait for the notice to mariners.
yeah, and the other thing on maps and charts, just get the most recent stuff, because we just had a boat that grounded in Samana. Frank, I think you heard that one. First it was a Mayday, it was a French boat. It didn't require a Mayday, but he went into a place that I checked after the fact and looked, and they had a 7.5 foot keel on a 58-foot sailboat, and went in and grabbed a catamaran mooring in the middle of a reef that has a big marker, big rock, in one map. I don't know what they had, but obviously they didn't have the most recent stuff. And it was marked clearly at 6 foot. Nobody got hurt except they lost their rudder. So now they're sitting in Samana getting their rudder fixed. And that was what, 4 days ago, something like that.
Joan, if I could, one
yeah.
more comment on charts. There's been some interesting articles about how frequently they are updated. And you'd expect companies like Garmin and Raymarine and others to update them regularly, but they're oftentimes quite far behind. Aquamap actually was shown to be one of the better ones within a month, but still there is a delay sometimes in updating these. The other thing that we noticed this year with our Navionics, which really threw me for a loop, we updated before we came, paid the fee, and I went to update it again a few weeks ago, and you can no longer select just an area to update. You have to do the entire chart, which in our case is 4 gigabytes.
Ouch.
I was on with Raymarine, with Navionics about 2 weeks ago with their customer help, trying to see if there's a way about it, because downloading a 4 gigabyte file here while at anchor doesn't make any, it's just not doable, and not doable regularly. And she ended up confirming that they've already received complaints that they changed this in the last edition, because it used to be you could choose a little section that you're in, and you talk about, thinking about your data. Well, I would choose the section and update. You can no longer do that with the Navionics.
Yeah, that started about 7 months ago, and you're in a long line of people who've got a problem with that.
Oh, it's absolutely horrendous. It's unbelievable that a company could, in this industry where people are at anchor and have limited bandwidth, and they should know that as a chart plotting. So it's a little frustrating.
Yeah, I think maybe this is a time where I say that none of us are being paid by Navionics or
No.
Aquamaps or anything,
No.
but this is just personal. But at the same time, that's very important information. If you can't download a change,
Right.
that's a big deal.
Correct.
And I don't see any, I think chat isn't working. There's some other stuff not working. We'll have to talk after this. Let me talk VHF radio, DSC, and shore service, cell service. So how does DSC work? We all have a VHF. We know we have digital select calling. It uses the MMSI number and your boat name in the radio, set in the radio to broadcast distress to line of sight vessels with similar radios, and to commercial and to land-based units. There's a loud alarm, a ship's name, and a position is sent. Now, you are all going to be able to get a copy of this. I'm not going to go over how this all works, or how your radio watches and acknowledges and all that. But that's another thing to test on your boat before you head out, is to test your VHF radio, but be sure and follow the test.
Please.
Yeah. Frank, you may have some just ideas of that. I will say that most foreign countries in the Caribbean, chat works. Jason's tested it. Thank you, Jason. Most like Trinidad and the French islands and Antigua, they're all using the digital select calling. So they're listening on their VHFs and radios. And so if you make a call, and that's how they're right now stressing it. And the US Coast Guard is stressing this system for nearshore boating. So remember, VHF and GPS both require boat power and electricity, batteries. I mean, that's something you have to have. to make that work. So just be sure that you always have a way for your VHF to work if you're going to use DSC or think you may be using it. Digital select calling. Again, you're going to get a copy of this, but that is a good way to a how-to from Boating Magazine. Just tested it. It's still there. And it tells how to send an electronic Mayday. But don't send a test out as a Mayday without making sure you're following the test procedures. And don't send a Mayday if you don't need to send a Mayday. A Mayday means you're drowning. It doesn't mean that you're scared, seasick, or something else. Some comments on near shore in the tropics, and I'm going to go over that a bit because some people are going to the tropics. First of all, in the Caribbean, each island has its own provider and services do not transfer. US plans may not work in the Caribbean. I suggest getting a one SIM card, one universal coverage, put it in have it in an unlocked phone, and even works. The one I used even worked in Cuba to call the marina as we're going into Cuba. But I just use it for, calling customs or whatever when I go into a new island before I find out where the Wi-Fi is or the cell service is locally. I also use my VHF for comms between dinghy, land, and boat, or I use my Zoleo to send email to my boat on my dinghy so that I knew what my captain was doing. Again, use it. Zoleo as an example, but you could use your satellite locator with your captain to go as he goes into customs, so you know what in the world's going on if you're sitting out there in the hook waiting for somebody to come back and you don't know what's going on and you don't have a cell that works. The idea is that you would have communications between shore and vessel. So all islands have some sort of Wi-Fi services. They change a lot. Data plans change a lot, and lots of people use Wi-Fi services, but check for their US plans with your current services because it can really be pricey. And again, not clear how Starlink will impact this in vessels. There's a lot of stuff happening with low Earth orbit, Starlink, container ships doing stuff. New technology. I have iPhone 13 there, Jason. It's now 14, so that's how fast it changes. Technology is kind of vertical, so your signal is going up into the sky. So antennas may control the, that's a controlling aspect, your antenna, the quality of your antenna for any of these. I put in something about swarm because it's something I'm interested in as I'm watching development because I'm an engineer, but satellite locator, something or even Starlink may migrate to something like that. I just don't know how soon that's actually going to work. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit real quick on antennas and where you put them on your boat. If you're going to put a high gain antenna for your cell phone on top of the mast, which is where it goes, you have it up at the top of the mast, you drop a cable down to the boat. Be sure you have 1 foot between your VHF antenna and your cell phone antenna. You have to have a foot. Your Wi-Fi antenna, however, goes within 10 foot of the water. Put it at the back of the boat or bow of the boat, but then run your cable back into your devices and wherever your hub is going to be. But those high gain antennas for your cells and stuff, that you put them at the top of the mast, run the cable down, but keep a foot between antennas or that you're going to have a real mess. Wi-Fi extenders. Again, don't put the Wi-Fi antenna at the masthead. It goes on the back of the boat. I use a Wi-Fi extender in my boat. And I use the below deck. I have I use a red halo for the antenna, and then I have some extenders in the boat as well. You have to be careful how you use this stuff, but I haven't had any problem with it. And I usually get several miles with my Wi-Fi extender. Again, you have to find someplace that has Wi-Fi, and more you're not finding that as easily sometimes. Coastal US works pretty well though. If you see in the diagram, I show where you have the antenna for the Wi-Fi booster. I use a router optimizer that's part of the red port halo. Then I have a tablet in Wi-Fi mode, and the Wi-Fi signal goes from the optimizer to that tablet. And again, I get several miles. Cell boosters. Now this starts with a hotspot or cell phone with a service plan. You can have a booster. You put that antenna at the top of the mast, 15-foot minimum from the deck. And then you're going to go down to inside your boat where you have a booster, amplifier, and a cell phone. I take one cell phone, and thanks to Louis Soltero for this, one cell phone, and I plug it in, plug a little hub into it. And then I'm able to use many devices going through that one cell phone. So it's kind of you're only allowed to have one cell connection for most of your cell service plans, but I use one and I connect it to a router. And then I use that Wi-Fi router to tell everybody else in the boat what's going on. And again, we'll be giving you this. There's actually a paper. If someone wants to see a paper, I can do that for you as well. It explains it. Cell boosters, there's many of them. Jason, you were going to say something?
Yeah, John, I was going to say, we don't have a cell booster, we do have a Wi-Fi antenna on the back. We use the Microtech pointing antenna on top, and that we've done the same thing and got several miles. It's worked very well where there is free Wi-Fi. It worked well for us when we were in the Keys, where you could park sometimes by a restaurant or others. Not here in the Bahamas, there's no free Wi-Fi. On the cell booster side, we don't have one. We've looked at it several times. What we do when we have some poor reception, and this actually worked for us in the Exumas National Park this year, we run the MiFi unit or a cell phone up the mast part way. We usually use one of the flag lines, put it up about 20 feet or so, and use that as a hotspot. Use the Wi-Fi on it, and then use one of our other devices to connect to, and that's worked well for us.
Jason, are you the one who was talking to me and then you had to go up the mast to check your cell phone or something?
No.
There was somebody who was doing the same thing, and they had hiked their thing up the mast and it wasn't working. I guess we were talking on HF radio. So they had to go up the mast, or something got stuck. I'm glad it wasn't you.
No, we just put it in a waterproof. We put either the cell phone or the MiFi unit in a waterproof bag and just hoisted up the flag line 20 feet or so. And it makes a huge difference if we're in a marginal area.
Well, thank you for that, Jason. Waterproof bags, a good idea for anything you put up the mast like that. Now, I have time. We've got a few minutes. I'll go on EPIRB and PLB if you want to listen along. Something important about your EPIRB, you need to have the right MMSI number with it, and that has to be an international one. It cannot be the one that Boat US has if you're going to be outside the US. And frankly, I think it's just better to get a good EPIRB that's an international one and use that. Same information, personal land, your personal locator beacon, your PLB, both of those will send an emergency message out that is received by the governments of the area that you're in, and they will route it to your country, or if it's in their area, they are going to help. It sends out two signals. One is digital to satellite. That's your that's a special message. It goes digital to satellite and it goes back to the command centers. But there is another signal that comes out. Most people aren't aware of that. That is a homing signal, an analog homing signal. And that homing signal means that you have to have that, should have that EPIRB with you in your life raft, because that's going to bring to you whatever commercial ship or however the governments are directing boats to come help you, they will use that homing signal. And if your EPIRB goes down with your boat, they aren't going to have the homing signal. The homing signal allows local search and rescue with government vessels or foreign vessels or commercial vessels with something called GMDSS, which is a universal system. Frank, you could probably know the name for it. I keep forgetting, but it is, it's what the commercial vessels use and the governments use, and they all can hear that homing signal and find that EPIRB or the personal locator beacon. These systems all send alert to satellites, to government mission control centers for verification, and then that's distributed to regional control centers. And this is pretty fast. But it also means you better have a correct MMSI number. You better have the right information for your device registered with your government. It makes a big difference. You don't have to spend time and wait to figure out if that EPIRB is on a junk pile or if it's on a boat that's moving.
A lot of the
Thanks.
Caribbean nations and all of Europe rely on GMDSS. By the way, that's Global Maritime Distress and Safety System, but it's also now got weather coming in as soon as they get 41X finished up. But the issue behind it is if you don't set it up right, then you're putting other people at risk as well. But the point is to make sure if you have a GMDSS set up, to be sure you have it set up correctly.
And some people have on private boats have that kind of setup too. That's where
Well,
the
DSC is an element of it,
Yeah.
so you've got part of it. You just don't have the whole system.
So if we have DSC and there's an alert going out from EPIRB, will they notify other boats around with DSC?
The EPIRB talks to the satellite.
Right.
Satellite talks to the MCC.
Right.
MCC goes to the RCCs. If the RCCs are going to use commercial vessels to assist in a rescue, they will send a message out at that point.
Okay. Now, personal locator beacon's one thing. Just remember it has less reach. It doesn't have the battery strength and less transmission time. And then register your beacons, register at NOAA.gov. Be sure it's updated before you leave. Make sure things are correct. And if you have a person on your registration, that is the person that the Coast Guard or RCC or whatever will call to see if you're really in trouble offshore. And if it is Aunt Tilly or Uncle Mac, who doesn't hear very well or doesn't see very well or doesn't understand about boats and water, and you just have a contact, that probably is not the best person to be the contact for your emergency. They should know where you are and what you're doing and be able to say, yes, they're offshore and I think they're near Puerto Rico, because that makes Frank's job a lot easier and a lot of other people's jobs a lot easier. So the person that you have on your float plan or your information that you register with, it's really important that it be someone who knows what you're doing. And sometimes we let it go for 10 years before we update it. That's not a good idea.
Yeah, the other half of that is to make sure that they know that you've got them on the notification list.
Yeah.
We've had plenty of times when we call somebody and they go, "You're calling me for what? From who?"
Right.
And it doesn't help.
Now, this image that I just put up, and Frank, I swiped it from the US government. That shows what that commercial system that the commercial boats have is an integration of a bunch of systems. This looks very messy, but it really is very efficient and very fast. So if your EPIRB sends off a message, it goes to a satellite around the world, and then that's going to start sending out information. They'll verify it, but then they'll be sending it out to different places around your vessel, hopefully to get someone or a boat to you pretty rapidly. We just had that happen. Well, Frank, the boat where the person had the stroke off of cases
2 weeks ago.
Yeah, they got a hold of a commercial ship. Did that come through government channels with?
Yes, it did. It was a redirect.
There was a person who had a very bad stroke on a boat going to the Marquesas. And they actually diverted a commercial vessel to that boat and loaded the person on the boat. I don't know the outcome of that. With strokes, you only have the golden hour, and I don't think he had that, but at least they got him to a boat and some medical care, so that they did the best they could.
Yeah, they took a medic off of another boat, and then a commercial vessel intercepted. The French Coordination Center through SARSAT out of Polynesia was the cognizant authority for that.
So each area that you're in, those messages will go to that area to help you. If you've pulled, you have an EPIRB message go off. It's a big, complicated system, but it works. Here's another picture, a little bit better, Distress call with beacon, search and rescue satellite goes to a local user terminal, mission control center, and then there's a rescue coordination. And this happens rapidly. Registration, register your MMSI number. Be sure that you use, there's a free, the MMSI numbers that come from Boat US. I think I better change that slides area there, but it's not an international one. So please, please, please get the international MMSI number if you leave the US. You register with your country of origin. If you don't renew it, you can get dropped. So please, please renew your registry. If you get a new to you boat or a new boat and you have MMSI numbers in all the devices, you get the former owner to make sure that they make you the new owner of those devices and use that, because otherwise you got to go change everything in every device. And then you will re-register with the correct information on that MMSI
That
number.
actually is the correct answer, is to put your MMSI in the new devices. Transferring an MMSI is very difficult, and it also is fraught with errors. Don't do that. Just put your MMSI in. You get a new boat or a new to you boat, put your MMSI in. Now the problem is some of them only have one-shot setups. Get with the manufacturer and tell them you just bought it, and they'll work with you to get that. They'll enable you to change it.
The VHF radio is kind of sensitive, some of them.
What's really the one that gets people in trouble is AIS.
Oh, yeah. Thinking on AIS.
I've worked with Vesper on changing MMSI numbers, and their support is pretty darn good. I'm sure with most of the others is just making the necessary contacts to make sure you do it. I think a lot of people just either forget or don't understand.
Yeah, the thing is that if you have your AIS is transmitting on somebody else's MMSI number, it's going to be harder to get help.
Right. The point is that Vesper and the others, they can reset the number in your unit, especially on the newer units. They can do it actually remotely. You can't do it yourself, but they can do it for you.
Well, I don't know what I'm doing here.
Jason makes a good point for that, though. It's several of the vendors who got where they can take over the MMSI entries on your devices and correct them. So if you've got a device, make sure it's got your MMSI in it. Almost all of them have got a way in which they'll display that number.
Yeah, that's kind of important. We had a boat, well, actually sank off of Hatteras, and he rented an EPIRB.
Yeah.
And it didn't have the right MMSI number, and he didn't know it. And the boat sank. And here's his EPIRB that went down with the boat announcing where they are. And we thought we had two boats sinking. So people were not happy.
The original one that came out as a collision at sea because it had two different addresses, both sinking at the same location.
Yeah. That was 2013, wasn't it, Frank? Yeah.
Sounds right.
Yeah. Keep your devices registered with the Coast Guard. Set up, register ahead of time, check your batteries, register a shoreside contact, and provide a vessel float plan. EPIRB with AIS is now available. I think almost everybody's using that now. Know how they work and have a plan and a ditch bag in case you have to do it. And we've sailed 35,000 miles out there and we haven't had to do anything, but we knew we practiced every time before we leave what we have to do. And Frank, you've gone around the world, so you've done that a lot of times, I bet.
Bunches and bunches, and I'll continue to do it bunches and bunches.
So AIS, how does it work? It actually transmits over the same, broadcasts a VHF radio signal with your GPS location and your MMSI number to line of sight vessels with AIS receivers. Ships information is sent, and all of us see our onboard AIS graphic device can alarm if a boat gets near us or whatnot. again, power to AIS and GPS systems, and you have to have a, your power. You have to have power. It uses a VHF antenna, or it can share a signal with boats with a splitter, but I'm happier with 2 antennas rather than a splitter. I've had some interference with splitters sometimes. At least get a good one if you're going to use a splitter. AIS transceivers have an internal GPS system, and AIS has been added to EPIRBs and some other devices such as AIS SART. What does this look like for how all of these come together? Again, this is a very messy diagram, but it actually builds a word out there in memory, and it keeps putting in the most recent in the front. And so it dumps stuff off the back, but at least you've got a huge string. And they've got that for wherever a boat is, it knows where the other boat is, and they're sending messages back and forth to each other. And for example, I would have a boat coming out of, well, this is Hampton, I think. Maybe not, but I think it's Hampton. Anyway, coming out of a channel, AIS sees targets not seen on radar because everybody's talking to each other and saying, I see this, I see this, I see this. So that's how the AIS works, and it's all running by VHF line of sight. So even though you don't have line of sight where I am back here, it's sending messages back and forth to other boats that are sending it on further. So AIS does see targets not seen on radar. Rescues. Again, we've talked a bit about that. I don't know that we need to beat up on anybody or keep talking about this, but single sideband has a radio, SSCA has a radio station, KPK, but KPK also does boatwatch.org, a face group Boatwatch as well. And that's actually being used by Starlink a lot when customers, because they can actually get to Facebook. Kind of interesting. Near shore, I'm getting kind of close on time. So what I think I will do is drop this down and go to questions. And if anyone has questions or comments, I welcome them. See if I can get this. There we go. I see we have some people. If anyone raises their hand or something, if you have questions, I appreciate Frank being here. And Jason, I appreciate you coming in on board. And Michael, thank you so much for this. We'll have a recording of this up, and the slides will be available for your use. Any of you who've registered. Oh, we have a hand raised here. Let's see if I can find the hand here. And there we go. Adam, can you can I
Yep.
put you on? There you go.
We're planning on sailing to the South Pacific, and we've got an Iridium Go. What would you suggest as a backup for weather?
Predict wind. Is that what you meant?
No, predict wind was, yeah, we're going to get that with the Iridium Go. But what would be a backup plan for weather?
Do you have single sideband capability?
I have been given a single sideband, but I haven't installed it.
What is the single sideband you have?
It's oh, come on.
802? Is it an 802 or 80?
It's
ICOM.
It's an ICOM, and it's an 8 series. Yes.
Tell you what, Adam. After this, I think you have the email address for president@ssca.org.
Okay.
I have helped every boat that has left the Chesapeake since well, I'd say at least 2000. And I've got it to the point now where I can zoom to your boat and talk you through the steps on the radio and how to operate it.
Okay.
So since you're going to the Pacific, I think it's very important. The single sideband is useful out there. You may end up also putting on Starlink if it's still usable by the time you head out. But I would suggest single sideband is really a way to go. So
the nets are still very active.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, definitely in the Pacific.
Okay,
Yeah, because nobody has money for the Starlink or cell services or Iridium and stuff. They're still using the single sideband.
Okay.
Do you have a radio license of it at all?
Actually, I got one from Australia because I did the Sydney Hobart race and we needed 2 licensed radio operators, and I was one of them.
Okay, so you have a ham license?
No, that's a national license.
Oh,
like
national
ours.
license.
Yeah, so no, I don't have a ham license now.
Well, you can use your single sideband with commercial services, but I would suggest you might also want to get ham. Frank, how important was it for ham for you offshore?
Well, I mean, enabled me to use the entire bandwidth, and when that one band was shut down, I was able to use the amateur bands. So, I mean, I think it's important that people have the ability to use both the ham and the commercial side.
You still
Yeah,
need to learn Morse?
Nope, not
Nope.
anymore. That's been gone.
Oh, good.
Now you just need to work your way up through 3 tests to get to general. And then you can pretty much handle whatever you need to.
Okay, and then those are all done online, or do you have to go someplace?
You have to go someplace. You can study for them online though, and the tests are all public information.
Gotcha.
Now all the questions are published.
And
Great.
where are you at, Adam?
New York.
New York.
Well, they still speak English in New York. Don't
Oh,
they?
that's true.
Yeah, okay.
Now-
So yeah, you shouldn't have a problem with that.
You can find a local ham group, or again, I think you know how to reach us, Adam.
Yes,
Shoot off an email and I'll see what we can find for you to help you get licensed or get your system up and running.
terrific.
John Parsons, he says, what are the licensing requirements for single sideband? Just to use the radio to talk on single sideband, or to listen and download stuff. You just need to have the operator's license for your boat, the FCC license. You have to tell them that you have a single sideband, but the licensing requirements for just listening or using the voice on the single sideband channels that are usually on your radio or set for your radio. It is a technician type license. If you want to use it for email, you can do it one of 2 ways. You can just use the regular operator's license that you get just to use voice and everything, and you buy a commercial service like SailMail, who allows you to use their license to get email and download it. Or you get a ham license, and then you have the ability to use like WinLink, which is the ham radio mail service to download your email.
Worldwide mail fabric.
Yeah. So the licensing requirements for SSB, very simple. You have it with your boat, you have it with your boat's operating license. That allows you to talk on the single sideband channels, which are, there's a lot of them. And you can listen to, pull down radio facts, you can get weather, you can talk to people. What you can't do though is do email. That would require either commercial service like a SailMail, or that you get your ham license and then you can use the service that is worldwide WinLink. It depends on where you're going to sail. Did that answer that, John? Silence, I answered live. Well, I think we've exhausted the audience probably, but thank you very much. I appreciate everyone attending. Adam, thank you. And Frank, thank you very much. Jason, thank you. And
Thank
I'm going to stop the share and drop down there. There's another question here. Oh, yes, thanks. Okay, John's got, I hope he understands that. But John, if you have a question, email. We'll answer it and help you if you're interested in learning more on your single sideband or anything we can do to help you. And having said that, it's now almost 17 minutes past the hour. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Frank, as always. Adam, thank you for your questions. And Michael, thank you.
And thank you for the webinar.
You're more than welcome. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye. Fair winds.